Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder, Richard Case, and co-host and retreat leader, Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today, we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday. This is actually Good Friday. This will be airing, and so excellent. It's kind of a special time. We welcome our good friend Denny Weinberg, who's going to monthly have the spot to share with us updates on Israel, since Israel is front and center to the end times, and lots of things going on over there. And Denny, who is Jewish and a Messianic Jew, has great connectivity with people in Israel that we actually get to learn what really is going on over there. So, right. So Denny, thank you so much. And by the way, I had a great conversation this week with your good buddy Angelo, and his son is interested in buying some housing here in Denver. So we had a good conversation about that, and it's kind of fun to. I really enjoy, just talking to him. It was fun. But we had a question come up, Denny, sent to us as we've been talking about this, of how should we look at, view, and understand the perspective of what's called the two-state solution. And by the way, most people don't even know what that really is. Mm-hmm. They hear it, and they're assuming it's just you divide the land, and the Jews and the Palestinians somehow run it together. So why don't we start with, maybe you could define it for us. When people say that, what is it? And then I know you've done research and have some lots of insight about it. You can just kind of talk us through it, and we may ask you some questions, but we'll kind of give you the floor and really talk about it.
Well, great to be back again, Kathy and Rich. So interesting, the two-state solution has a different meaning depending on who you're talking to. Mm-hmm. Like lots of things, when there's disputes, just the very words bring about a whole different history. And as you know, I've got a really fantastic contact in Tel Aviv that I went to kindergarten with in the States, and he spent the last 35 years by choice as an Israeli, and now leads an organization that supports lone soldiers who come from all over the world to fight alongside the ADF, and it's a wonderful work he does there. But as a result, he comes and visits a lot. I stay in touch with him now more and more as some of these questions come to me. So I'm not an expert at this. I'm an American Jew who has a Jewish perspective from just being an American Jew, but he has given me a pipeline to the vantage point of Israelis, or at least Israeli Jews, that is super interesting. We in the West think this two-state solution, we think of it like this. There is some land, and let's divide it in half, and the one set of people will have one part of that land, another set of people have the other set of land, and everything will be fine. Everybody will get what they want. They'll stop killing each other because it's all about the land. And maybe it's about the unfairness of who's got the land or who should have the land or any of that stuff. So that's how we think about it. We try and go back to a place of fairness. I think Americans are maybe even influenced, some Americans are even influenced by the question of how did we acquire land in the United States? Yeah, and absolutely. And it's interesting because here there were settlers that came in, and that was one means that land began to be occupied. But there was a lot of purchases made. There were deals made with other countries. There were that acquired land. There were wars fought for many, many years that acquired land or denied land. And so our boundaries in the United States have been set by a lot of ancient history, ancient U.S. history that we all studied, and we recognize what our borders are, and we recognize, if we paid attention in school, how those borders came to be. There's a very similar definition of the boundaries of the land of Israel, or the land of Palestine, as Israeli Jews call it. And up until not very long ago, Palestine meant the Jewish people.
That's right.
All through history, And so, and because those boundaries are set by agreements that were made, and wars that were fought, and land that was taken, much like the United States, Israelis have a real sense of where their land is. The problem is there's some fuzzy boundaries, just like we could say there's a little bit of fuzzy boundaries around the nations of the Native Americans. They're inside the boundaries of the United States, but they're declared by treaties and other things as being land that belongs to people that were here before. But if you ask the question, well, what was the land called before any of us showed up? There wouldn't be a real good answer to it. It was just the land of the people that were there.
Yeah.
And so the history I get when I ask this question is, let me take you back to how those things were defined. And it's been really marvelous. I'm not a historian, so this was a lot of probably history I didn't pay attention to in school, but I got a lot of really interesting history that really makes up why Israelis are very clear on this and why the others are not very clear on this.
I'm excited to hear
this.
Yeah.
So walk us through that.
So at the end of World War I, this is the great empires that fought, and at the end of it, the Ottoman Empire was taken apart and redistributed, and the main players in all of that were the French and the English and others who participated in this. But the result was that there was a group of things called mandates that were created, and different parcels of land were associated with these mandates. This is really when the modern day Middle East was defined. At the time, the people that had an interest in it were those that were described as the Arabs, the Jews, the Turks, the Armenians, and the Kurds. And the result was that the Kurds and the Arabs' solution was what was defined as what became Turkey. The French and the British broke up much of the remaining land that's now Jordan and Egypt and Israel and Lebanon through these things called mandates. And one of the parcels that was created there was the mandate of Palestine. And it's very similar to what is today is Israel. There have been some differences for the reasons, we were talking about wars and other things. But that was the first time that, by agreement of all the nations that settled World War I, about the creation of a new parcel called Palestine, the Palestine Mandate.
And previously to it being
interesting
called Palestine,
in that,
can you
no,
share?
because I've got a map here of Ottoman Empire. Yeah, there's a map of what is French-controlled, British-controlled, Ottoman, Russia, Persia, Saudi, and Egypt, and that's it. Everything that we know of as Israel today and Jordan, and Iraq was all British territory.
Right.
Wow.
And then another section, which is Syria and Lebanon, is all part of French territory. And then the Ottomans were above that. So there wasn't anything shaped like the countries we now know. They were created as part of that. And there was great agreement, evidently, by all of the countries of the world. I was going to go to sort of the next, but let's stop there for a second. So this is the first time that, and it was the only reference to this land as Palestine. There was not much of a Jewish presence there. Jews are scattered all over the world. It was just the land of Palestine. And I think that's probably aligned to sort of the old, even biblical, the Palestine comes from the Philistine, root words, and that's where that all came from. So they recognized that. Now, in this resolution, there's the United Nations Resolution 181 that created, or maybe it was even the League of Nations before that created this partitioning. There were 181 countries that voted on this, all agreed to do this except 13. Of the 13, 10 of the 13 were Muslim countries that voted against it. The only other 3 that voted against it were Cuba, India, and Greece. So almost at its beginnings, There were people that had a rebellious view of this, and they were the people that are probably still fighting today. But it was an agreement by the vast majority of the world to do this.
And that happened at the end of World War I?
End of World War I, yeah.
Okay.
And it's the partitioning of you can look it up, the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, and it's really well described. And the funny thing is when I ask, my Jewish friend, he immediately goes to there. He says, it's really important because the question of is there one state or there's two states goes back to when did this piece of land get defined as a separate piece of land of its own. And that's the first point where there was a spot of land about the size of Israel. And it was called Palestine.
Yeah, and one piece of good important information there is that in World War I, which again was led by Germany and Italy, the Muslims joined the Axis, which was Germany and Italy, to join them in world domination, and they were occupying that area. They they lost. and as a result of them joining that losing, the United Nations, which was the League of Nations, said we're going to redistribute that whole area and establish a different sovereignty over that. And that was the French and the British and the Ottomans. That they said, okay, you can go to Turkey, and so it was out of the war and the conclusion of that war that they even set it all up. But it was set by them, and what Denny's saying is that it was a worldwide voting to set it up that way. So Denny, go ahead and keep going. I just wanted to have everybody understand World War I and what really happened there. By the way, World War II, the Muslims said we're not going to join anybody. we don't want to be on the wrong side of anybody, so we're just not going to join anybody. And then after World War II, and Denny will probably get into this. This is when they set up actually the sovereignty of Israel. Okay, so now it's Palestine. So now it's Palestine. Okay, then what happened?
He says to Jewish people in Israel, they equate the word Palestine with meaning Jewish. So this is another thing that's going on in the heads of those, and it's probably biblical in nature that we'll return to the homeland, and all that was part of the heritage of Jews. And so they, I think. There's this notion that Jews viewed this as the homeland being created, although as you said, Rich, that wasn't its intent at all. I looked up just on, what was this Palestine mandate? What did it mean? Why did they use that term? And in on Wikipedia or something, it says the British mandate for Palestine, which is between 1918 and 1948, which is between World War I and World War II, was the outcome of several factors. The British occupation of the territories previously ruled by the Ottoman Empire, the peace treaties that brought the First World War to an end, and finally, and this is important, the principle of self-determination that emerged after the war. So the idea was each of these areas would create a self-determining, self-ruled mechanism, and the world would not have to, we're going to create this, it's now up to you. And it's really important because the question is, what did the people who inherited this land do with it?
Yeah.
So we fast forward to 1947, 48, end of the Second World War, and that is when UN resolutions carved out. There's a really interesting graph of this, the partitioning in 1947, and it shows almost identically modern-day Israel, the parameters of it, from the Dead Sea and the Jordan River and the Tiberias Lake, or the Sea of Galilee, on the right-hand side, Jordan River coming down, and then all the way over to the Mediterranean. Same Israel. But if you look at how it's broken up, all of the Arab state, and it wasn't just this little strip of Gaza, all the way down the border to Egypt, and most of the center of the country, including completely encircling Jerusalem, Jericho, almost to Tel Aviv, practically all the way up to Lebanon, was all Arab defined as the Arab state, and the Jewish state was everything else, which was mostly desert. They had the coast, a big part of the northern coast of the Mediterranean Sea, but the rest of what was designated as the Jewish state was desert. And so, and they were, and they were thrilled. Jews were thrilled. At least I have land. It's got nothing in it. It's just stinking desert. And all of this really, all these big cities were given to the Arab nations. And so you look forward on that, and the question of what happened with self-determination. The Israelis created their own hospitals, their own schools, their own public transportation, their own government. The Arabs did none of that. They continued to view themselves as part of the greater Arab nation or greater Syria. And, again, this is what I'm reading as I go through this, but I'm also hearing this guy talk about this time period, that who did what with their land? They were given the opportunity to create an independent, separate, two-state solution by the creation of Israel. And so this is the beginning of why do we talk about a two-state solution? It was given to both sides in 1947.
Yeah. Yeah. And at that point, because that's when we say the return of Israel back as a nation, the area that they had was to be now called Israel again and governed by Israel. Is that correct?
The way it's laid out, if you look at the maps, it says the Jewish state and the Arab state, and then the Jerusalem district. So okay. Jerusalem was still set up as a completely separate, but it was an island. There was no way into it from anywhere else.
Okay. So and the Jewish, so the Jewish,
it had its own governance.
The Jewish state was mostly of what we call the land of Israel. What was the Palestinian or the Arab state? What geographically? What is that? What was that? Was that where Jordan is now, or was it part of where Israel is?
It's not part of Syria. No, because the lines. No, you'll see Egypt at its current Egyptian boundary, south of Israel. What's shown here on this map at that time was Transjordan, which is at its current Jordan's eastern border and Israel's western border, exactly as it is today. Syria and Lebanon up at the top at the existing borders. So the borders of those countries, and those countries now existed: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, with Amman as its capital, Egypt with Cairo, and then inside the Israeli boundaries were these partitions of Arab state inside the geography of the Jewish state.
Okay, and were they?
And the only thing that touches a boundary is what touches a boundary today.
Were those?
So it's interesting.
Those
There's a little bit more context.
Were those Arab states to be ruled by themselves then, or were they under the rulership of the broader Israel?
That was the idea of the principle of self-determination. Yeah, the idea of self-determination in this Palestine mandate would be that the Arab state would create its own government, the Jewish state would create its own government. One did, the other didn't.
Okay.
And the reason is because the Arabs chose, rather than to accept their state, they chose to be part of this broader Arab universe, and they and as a result, they just became an attached part of other countries, or an unclear attachment. But they never chose to do the things that the Jews did in their portion, which was create a country, irrigating the desert.
Do you have any insight about that? When they were given that opportunity, what was the reason they didn't take that opportunity?
Yeah, I don't know that, Rich. It's a good question. Because I'm getting this from an opinion of a guy who's restating this from Israel's view. And he said, on May 15th, Israel declared its independence. No similar action was taken by the Arabs. Instead, the Arab League met and announced it would drive the Jews into the sea.
Yeah.
This is back in 1948. That began this from the river to the sea that's really never ended. No. So rather than us take advantage of the land we've been given, create a state, we just got to get these other guys out that were created as a part of a of a decision by the whole world after World War II.
Yeah, yeah, and I think
And
what you're saying there is kind of
important.
important. It's kind of important to understand the motivation and the positioning at that point, with, in a sense, kind of a two-state solution. They actually didn't accept their position in that. They said, no, we want everything, and we're going to drive out, defeat, and destroy anything that Israel has been given. And that's a position. So instead of saying, let's go ahead and establish our state.
That's the position they would take, is that. And when you say, let's create a two-state solution today to an Israeli, they go back to 1948, we already did that. And here's what happened.
And it didn't work.
We created this fabulous, thriving country. They didn't, but instead, Arab neighbors, in their own sovereign countries, sort of declared that this Arab state inside these boundaries were going to be a mechanism for them to undo what the world had just decided they were going to do, is create a two-state solution with complete independence and around the principle of self-determination.
Okay. And then
by the way, there was no Palestinian flag at that time. He says in his comment, there was no Palestinian flag, no kingdom, no parliament, nothing.
So it wasn't separate sovereignty. And then in the 67 war, that was when they were attempting to annihilate Israel. And what happened then? Because then the boundary of Israel actually expanded, what we call back similar to the biblical land definition. What do you have any insight on how that worked? And I know the 6-Day War was the Arabs and the countries around them were all attempting to eliminate Israel, and God miraculously saved them.
He describes that period from the 1950s through the 1960s as a time of guerrilla warfare from Jordan, from Egypt, and attacking Israeli citizens and militia and military, like what we have today. But it was constant. But it's coming from these other countries as a way of keeping things disrupted. And then it obviously hit a point. There was the war in 1967. Then there was the Yom Kippur War in 1973. And he said that the first time you heard the term the Palestinian people was after the 6-Day War in 1967. And that's a very, very, it's a very present term created, out of that war. And as you said, Rich, if you look at the maps of how much territory, how much of Egypt Israel occupied, I mean, it went way into Egypt, way into Jordan, way up into the north, into Syria and Lebanon. And you're right, over time, Israel retracted those boundaries, most of those boundaries, but it did change the size of the islands of what was inside. So there was the state of Israel now continued to occupy a direct path into Jerusalem, for example. And so those big islands that were everything except the desert, have shrunk down as a consequence of those wars. Yeah. And so the land that was the Jewish state is bigger even inside the boundaries. But as you said, they left behind those boundaries that they'd gone out to in peace settlements that were made. A lot of that happened under Carter when Begin and Sadat got together. And there was an attempt, real attempt at peace there that didn't work. And so it's been this back and forth. He recounts, those two wars. There was a war in 1979, just after Carter and Begin and Sadat met. There was a war in 82 in Lebanon, a war in 94 that broke up between Jordan and Israel, and then all these, the first and second infadadas, and then the Lebanon War in 2006, and then the first of three Gaza wars, 2008, 2012, and what we have now. So it went from a very structured two-state solution to increasing disruption, wars, and then chaos. And now the cry for we need a two-state solution. That's how they look at it.
Yeah.
And the Israelis said, their view is, we've already done this. We know what this leads to. If you don't first declare that you abandon, that you meet what the original mandate was about, which was self-determination, and the right to exist. So that's why Israelis just keep coming back until they say they will recognize Israel, the state of Israel. There is no hope of a solution.
Okay, so the world, including the United States, is suggesting, and they say, a two-state solution. Okay, what exactly are they recommending, and then what is Israel's position on that?
Today, Israel would say that the position is like this Hamas leader just recently said. This is after October 7th. We reject the two-state solution. October 7th proved that liberating Palestine from the river to the sea is realistic and has already begun. So Israel's view is there is no, it's a non-starter until that ends. Right. We've already started wiping you out. So what does the two-state solution mean? Until they, and I think they would say this has always been the case. Other than in Egypt and Jordan, after the peace treaty that Carter and the other two negotiated, where Jordan and Egypt accepted Israel's right to exist as a state. Other than that, there's been almost none. And until all of their neighbors agree to that, and then the question is, how do you get this loose Palestinian state to agree to that? Because nobody knows who represents them. Their view is no, it's not happening. There is no yielding anymore.
Yeah. So if I can,
they have only one red line that's got to be threshold that's got to be met.
Yeah. So the real issue, as we look at the world dynamic of it, is that since we don't understand the history of it, we can propose, well, why don't you just give a plot of geography and let the Palestinians, what's now called the Palestinians, which would be Arabs, not Jews, which is, I've always knew that, and you helped clarify that. Let them just live there and rule themselves. But the truth is, the Arabs themselves reject that.
Yeah.
That's not what they want. So we say, well, why don't you do it that way? And they're saying, well, that's not even what we want. We want the whole thing. And Israel's saying we can't allow them because they want the whole thing. And all we would be doing would be enhancing more terrorism. Is that kind of
well? And the most recent example they would give of that, because they've tested this. So in 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who was prime minister at the time, he pushed through the Knesset a vote to evacuate all Jewish residents from Gaza. This is in 2005, and they did. And so they said, this is now yours. We are all gone. And that really, of course, isolated the two countries, but it created a small example of here is now your state. And what happened? Nothing changed. There's no beautiful beaches. There's no attractive, European tourism there, right? Nothing happened. It's a ghetto.
And from there is where the Hamas operated to attack Israel, right? Yeah.
So given there's we could sort of say, well, spiritually there's a difference. When God's chosen people were given a state and given the freedom to self-govern, they had the wherewithal and the blessing and and all those things. They did what they needed to do. They created one of the most prosperous countries in the world. A center for biotech now and high technology and wealth, and in what was desert. They used this. They said, we got desert. What are we going to do? They created these kibbutzes as a way of turning deserts into thriving farms. And so they dealt the hand they were given. And spiritually, maybe you're saying the exact same opportunity existed for this Arab state, which occupied more territory. If you look at this map, I'll send it to you, Rich, and you can post it. There was more square miles of land that was Arab state than there was Jewish state, and all of the big cities were there.
But they didn't do the same with it. Yeah.
So, and so we as believers, we say, well, what's really going on there? Was this really just bad human decision making, or was there blessing and curse, that was playing out?
Yes. Yep. Well, we'll continue and come back and have Denny back. And Denny, the next question that we want to have you back on is, given what you just explained to us, with the world desiring a quote, a two-state solution, the Arabs themselves really not wanting that, and certainly the Jews are saying no. Let's come back and have you discuss all the current dynamics of what does all that look like, and what is happening, and then what likely is to happen given, and again, I'm just looking at it from a simple review, is there really isn't a solution that you've got two forces, one that wants to eliminate the other one, and Israel, all they're trying to do is just exist. And so that doesn't seem like that's going to work out. So.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. What would they view as the right answer that is practically achievable?
Yes. Yeah. That's the question, and we'll come back and deal with that. So, Denny, thank you. It's a terrific history. With this information, the truth of it, it starts to, okay, that explains something, and thank you for enlightening our audience on understanding it, and then of course we'll keep processing what then does it mean, and what is one objective of Israel and what's the other objective of the Arabs, and potentially how's this going to work out? Work out meaning what's going to happen. So, Father, we thank you for Denny and his great insight, wisdom, and connectivity to Israel, and be able to help us understand things that are just so. And we pray that we'll receive that and look forward to more discussion about what this means and what we can understand as we know toward the end. We do know that Israel remains and it becomes the center of attention at the end. And so help us understand that in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Denny, and thank you to the listeners for joining us. If you have any questions, send them in to us at questions@abideministry.com. It is such a privilege, Denny, to have your voice on this right now. It's just really such a blessing. So thank you.
And we get, by the way, that's the question was, could you have Denny talk about this?
Yes.
Okay,
and we're all for that. This is great.
That's good. Let's get the guy who knows. So thank you so much. All right, Denny, we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.